The rising light did not arrive all at once. It seeped into the desert the way heat clings to metal, slow, certain, and without invitation. Sloane had been in position long before the sun cleared the eastern ridge. She lay prone beneath a ragged camouflage net stretched over a cluster of rocks and thorn grass. Her cheek pressed against the padded comb of her rifle stock, her eye fixed through the scope. The land in her view was vast and empty, carved into shallow wadis and broken flats. Somewhere far ahead, the SEAL team would begin moving soon. A fly buzzed near her face, circling once before settling on her temple. She ignored it. She hadn't moved in more than an hour, save for the minute adjustments to her windage dial or the pencil marks she etched onto a laminated range card anchored beside her. Sweat pooled under her uniform, soaking into her back and thighs. Her collar stuck to the side of her neck. The last of the ice in her pack had turned warm before the sun even crested the ridge. There was nothing left to regulate the heat, just breath, control, and the methodical silence of overwatch. Her rifle stretched out in front of her like an extension of thought. The bolt assembly had been cleaned twice before 0500. The suppressor was locked in place. No round was chambered. Not yet. She didn't blink much. The left edge of her optic had picked up a haze of grit, a faint smear from the wind that caught the glass whenever she tilted it too high. She noted the blemish, adjusted her angle, and moved on. The sight picture remained stable. Downrange. Heat shimmer danced just above the flat wash. Mirage waves distorted outlines, bending shadows across the earth. She compensated by adjusting her holdover and updating her drift calculations. Even trained eyes could be fooled this early in the light. There were no visible footprints, no tire marks, no sign of movement, friendly or otherwise. But the desert was deceptive, and she did not trust quiet unless it was earned. Sloane scanned slowly from left to right. A distant rock formation, angular, cracked by decades of sun, cast long shadows across a dry gully. A line of dunes beyond that marked the edge of her field. 100.0 meters past those, the terrain dropped into a funnel where visibility tightened. If the SEALs followed the route from their original briefing, they would cross into that space within the hour. But if conditions changed, they might alter course. She had to be ready either way. Her fingers moved over the rifle controls with practiced confidence. Each click on the turret felt deliberate. She checked barometric pressure again. Crosswind had shifted slightly from the southeast. She adjusted and marked it on her card. The sun hadn't yet fully risen, but the light already painted the ground in a washed-out yellow. Nothing offered shade. Nothing offered comfort. The desert was impartial. It didn't care who passed through it or why. She remembered the final briefing before deployment. There had been no names, only roles, coordinates, and the confirmation that she'd never see the team she was assigned to cover. That was the point. She was not a presence. She was insurance. The goal was that they never needed her. But if things went wrong, if enemy scouts moved too close, if an ambush formed, if one wrong movement brought noise into the canyon, then she would exist for a moment, and then vanish again. A beetle crawled along the stone inches from her elbow. She didn't flinch. Sweat traced a slow line down the center of her spine. The only sound was the faint crackle of her earpiece, static layered behind silence. The transmitter at her hip blinked once, every few seconds. Green, steady, waiting. She made one more sweep of the canyon floor, then paused to refresh her glass. No lens cloth this time. Just the edge of her sleeve, wiped gently across the scope's outer ring. The landscape remained unchanged. A single vulture drifted overhead, circling high without purpose. To her left, a sharp outcropping broke the skyline. Beyond it, only sky and shimmer. Sloane inhaled through her nose, held the breath, and released it slow. The breeze had faded. Her surroundings had taken on that strange, early-day stillness, like the earth itself was holding its breath. Her gloved hand brushed the pouch clipped to her belt. Inside was a backup map, A small piece of shade tarp, a wrapped protein bar she hadn't touched since yesterday. She wasn't hungry. Hunger belonged to other people. Her body had learned to operate without checking for comfort. Only systems mattered out here. Then it came. A small, precise double click in her earpiece. The signal was faint, but unmistakable. She exhaled. No words. Just the agreed code. Odin in position, talons approaching. She shifted her cheek into the stock. Her breathing slowed. The hunt had begun. The first silhouette appeared as a heat-warped blur near the edge of Sloane's scope. It moved with practiced caution, weaving between low ridgelines and narrow cuts in the terrain. A second figure followed close behind, then a third. She tracked each of them through the shimmer, noting the angle of approach, the timing between positions, the rhythm of their progress. 5 total. That matched the file. A SEAL team moving as one, well-spaced, low profile, no wasted movement, no hesitation except for one. The rearmost figure paused too often, kept checking his 6, turning his head like he expected shadows to shift behind him, new or nervous, possibly both. She didn't judge him, just noted the pattern, adjusted for it, and swept the field again. The team moved into a section of rocky incline that offered partial concealment. It wouldn't last long. Beyond that was open ground baked flat by wind and sun, with no vegetation tall enough to matter and no cover deep enough to trust. She logged their last position on her range card and moved the reticle slightly west. A faint line of dust caught her attention. It wasn't from the SEALs. It was higher, wider, something light, but fast-moving. 2 specks emerged from the scrub enemy scouts on foot, maybe 800 meters out and closing from the left. They weren't charging. They were scanning. Their heads moved in deliberate arcs. One raised a compact optic, maybe binoculars. He paused, scanned the ridgelines. His posture was alert. Sloane's breathing stayed even. She didn't shift her elbows or adjust her posture. Her finger moved gently to rest near the trigger well, not on it. The crosswind had shifted again, subtle but real. She recalibrated for the direction and strength, adjusted elevation by half a click, and logged the estimate. Her optics were clear, except for one edge haze. It wouldn't matter now. Her scope settled on the lead scout. The decision didn't come from urgency. It came from protocol. Her job wasn't to hunt. It was to protect. The SEALs hadn't seen the scouts, hadn't changed their pace or course. That meant they were vulnerable. That made this her responsibility. She took in a slow breath, steadied the reticle, held at the exhale, and squeezed. The suppressed shot cracked softly. The sound vanished in the open air. Through the scope, she saw the impact. The scout folded instantly, no stagger. No warning, just dropped where he stood, legs crumpling under him, head sinking into the dust like it had never been raised. The desert held its breath with her. The second scout flinched hard, dropped low, and rolled to cover behind a dry outcrop. He didn't look toward her. He looked behind him, then toward the distant hills, then into the valley, but not up. He didn't know. He wouldn't fire. Instead, he crawled back through the rocks, angling toward a path that disappeared between 2 sandstone shelves. She tracked him, but didn't follow through. One shot had been enough. The SEALs had vanished into the terrain like vapor. She hadn't seen them move, but they were gone. The last figure, nervous, slow to check his flank, had ducked down near a large slab and never rose again. It was like the land had swallowed them. No calls on the radio, no acknowledgement, just silence and discipline. She eased back slightly from the scope and blinked the dry from her eyes. Her glove moved to the range card again. She marked the wind drift, elevation hold, impact placement. The grease pencil left a faint smudge across older notes. She didn't erase. Each detail stayed. No information was ever wasted. The dust where the scouts had walked was still visible, traced like a line of faint footprints sketched across the earth. One set stopped short. The other faded toward cover. She would not know if the second man had kept going or stopped to radio what he'd seen. That risk now passed to others. Her role was to observe the next threat before it materialized. Her heart slowed. Not from exhaustion, she hadn't moved more than a breath, but from release. The tension had not built into panic. It had focused into purpose. She had pulled the trigger without emotion, but not without weight. The sound was gone, but the choice lingered. Her silence returned. She realigned her position. No part of her gear had shifted. Her netting still held. The rifle's length remained snug against her shoulder, the scope tight in her line of sight. She took another breath and held it for a count. Her hands did not shake. The scout who fled might tell someone. He might vanish into the desert and never speak, or he might return with a patrol in a few hours, guessing where the shot had come from. That was beyond her now. She had done what needed doing. Nothing more. Through the glass, the world looked unchanged haze, heat, silence, but it had shifted. A line had been drawn, seen only by her. The seals were safe, for now, and no one had looked up. The wind started as a whisper, brushing across the top of Sloane's ridge and stirring the edge of her netting with a rhythm so faint it could have been imagined. But by mid-morning, it had thickened. Gusts swept grit across her face, pulled loose fabric at her elbows, and began to strip visibility from the canyon below. Her scope wavered. What had been steady shimmer an hour earlier now buckled in the wind, making the land bend and dance with every pulse of air. She didn't flinch. Sand worked its way under the collar of her shirt and into the seams of her gloves. Her bolt assembly began to feel dry, sluggish. She brushed the receiver gently with the edge of her sleeve. The optics stayed mostly clean, but every gust left a fine coat of grit across the lens. She wiped it with care, keeping the rifle level and stable. Her eyes stung, but she stayed focused. The wind had shifted again 5 degrees off axis, gusting at inconsistent intervals. Then, the vibration hit her earpiece. One brief pulse. Not a warning, just an update. She reached slowly to her side, unlatched her map pouch, and pulled out the laminated grid, flattening it across the stone beside her. She scanned for the updated mark. The seals had shifted course, swinging northeast behind a high fold of terrain she couldn't see from this ridge. Their new approach was outside her coverage. If she stayed here, they would disappear from her line of sight. She stared at the map, jaw tight. The original brief had been clear hold position and less compromised. She hadn't been compromised. But this wasn't about her. It was about them. If anything happened in that corridor and she wasn't watching, the fault would be hers. She folded the map again, locked the data in her head, and made the call. She began the crawl. Rifle first, then pack, then her body, sliding flat across the stone. She dragged her netting behind her with one hand, while the other kept the weapon shielded from the worst of the dust. The move wasn't long, less than 20 meters, but the space between ridge lines was exposed. Every movement felt amplified in the storm. Her boots scraped once against a loose rock. She froze, let a gust pass, then continued. The new perch gave her a better northeast angle but came with no natural cover. She dug a shallow depression into the slope and dropped into it. Wind hit her sideways now, spraying her with grit every time she lifted her head. She cleared her optic with the back of her glove, exhaled, and waited for clarity. Her eyes narrowed. The scope steadied, and finally, through the static of blowing sand, movement took shape. 3 enemy fighters crouched near a broken culvert on the far side of a dry channel. The terrain there was sunken, jagged, laced with outcrops perfect for concealment. They weren't patrolling. They were waiting. She saw no uniforms, no matching gear, just shapes, weapons, armor, and the unmistakable stillness of an ambush team. She adjusted fast. Not for distance she had that, but for drift, heat haze, and visual obstruction. She had seconds. The lead fighter leaned forward, signaling something. Sloane centered the reticle, held her breath, and fired. The first shot cracked into the storm, muffled and swept instantly by wind. She watched the target twist and fall sideways, motion crumpling as dust rose around him. The second man stumbled. She fired again, less settled this time. He spun, hit in the shoulder, and collapsed against a slab of stone. The third bolted into the rocks and vanished. Sloane did not pursue with a third shot. Her job wasn't vengeance. It was clearance. Seconds later, the SEALs emerged, slipping past the culvert with low silhouettes and disciplined speed. One tossed a smoke canister that bloomed wide and white in the wind. Within moments, they were gone, consumed by the storm's veil. She stayed prone, her cheek pressed into the dust, rifle tucked beneath her. She ran a dry cloth across the bolt, dislodging the fine sand that had begun to collect in the recesses. It wasn't jammed, but it was close. Her hands worked in silence. Her focus returned to the scope. The storm was worsening. Visibility dropped by the minute. She scanned the ambush site. Nothing moved now but smoke and swirling haze. Her position had held. Her shot had mattered. That was enough. Her limbs ached from tension. Not fatigue, not the kind of soreness that came from work, but the kind that came from not moving at all. She shifted slightly, back into the curve of the shallow trench, and let her head rest for a moment against the slope. The noise of the wind was constant, scraping across the rock like distant whispering. She looked once more through the glass. No shapes, no movement. Just brown dust and the memory of figures that had once stood there. She remained still. The only motion was the soft flecks of her breath against the dirt. She did not reach for her water. She did not break her posture. The wind would pass. When it did, she would be ready again. The storm didn't end so much as settle. What had been a furious wall of dust became a low, dense haze that clung to the landscape like ash. The sky above was the color of pale bone. The sun still burned through it, but its light was warped, stretched into long, horizontal bands across the desert floor. From her new perch, Sloane remained motionless. Her body was pressed into the slope, her rifle wrapped tight beneath her, and her netting weighted with grit. Every surface carried a film of dust. Her uniform was streaked dull gray, and her face felt stiff from dried sweat. Her lips were cracked. The inside of her mouth tasted like ground stone. One of her lenses had picked up a scratch during the last reposition. The damage wasn't critical, but it refracted sunlight just enough to draw her attention if she angled it wrong. She adjusted the tilt of her cheek against the comb and kept the glass low. Her visibility was degraded, but still usable. Her water ration hadn't been touched since 0600. She didn't reach for it now. The wind had dropped. Sound carried farther again, but the silence was worse than the roar. It made everything feel exposed. The kind of quiet that tricks the mind into thinking movement is louder than it is. Sloane didn't move. Her eyes tracked the edge of a broken ridge, just beyond the wash. A few crows circled lazily in the distance. The SEAL team had moved on hours ago, long out of range, but her position held until the air cleared or command called her back. Then she heard it. A low, steady hum, mechanical, muted, but close enough to register through dust and rock. Her breath slowed. She didn't lift her head, just shifted her eyes toward the west. After several seconds, the top of a vehicle emerged through the haze. A technical truck, faded green, with a canvas-covered cab, crept along the slope below her. Its tires moved without noise, carving faint lines in the grit. Two figures sat in the cab. Another 3 clung to the rear platform. One stood and pointed toward the ridge. The truck stopped. Doors opened. Boots hit the ground. They moved slowly. No urgency. No alarm, but they were searching. One man carried a compact device. Thermal scanner. He swung it left to right, scanning elevation, pausing every few steps to adjust a setting. He was walking directly toward her. Sloane slid her left hand to the rifle. Not to fire. To cover. She dragged the mesh netting forward and pulled it across the glass of her scope. The last thing she could afford was a heat signature from uncovered optics. She pressed herself flatter against the rock, inhaled through her nose, and counted. The man walked higher. 6 meters. 4. He paused near a patch of scattered brush, raised the scanner, and swept it toward the slope. Sloane could hear the faint grind of gravel under his boots, the quiet click of a dial being turned. Her hand remained steady on the rifle's stock. She didn't blink. 3 meters. He was nearly on top of her. She could see the lower half of his leg now, fabric stretched over his shin, dusty and sun-bleached. The scanner panned again, catching a flicker of light before resetting. She didn't know if he saw anything. She didn't think he did. Her body temperature had dropped during the storm, and her posture hadn't changed in almost an hour. If there was heat, it would be faint, blurred by the ambient temperature. He turned. A voice called out from the truck, sharp. "Commanding!" The man responded with a gesture, then turned away. He moved downhill, scanner now idle at his side. One of the others tapped the truck's hood. The engine rumbled back to life. The men climbed aboard. Dust curled around the wheels as the truck pulled away, rolling back toward the lower slope. Sloane did not move. Not for 1 minute. Not for 5. She remained face down, cheek in the dust. Every breath controlled. Her muscles ached. Her shoulders trembled. Her neck began to cramp. She ignored it. Only after the sound was gone, after the stillness returned completely, did she lift her head a fraction of an inch. Her netting shifted slightly in the wind. She checked her hands. They were steady again. The scope was dusty but functional. She wiped it once with her sleeve and made a short, clean note on her range card: contact proximity 3 meters. No exposure, no engagement, no heat bloom. Her chest rose and fell slowly. The land ahead was empty. The air carried no sound. She adjusted her angle, pulled the netting tight again, and returned to her hold. Nothing more needed to happen. Her goal was not recognition. It was removal from detection, from memory, from sight. She remained invisible, and that meant she was still doing her job. The sun had shifted low enough to flatten the desert into long shadows and bronze light. From her final overwatch perch, Sloane scanned the extraction corridor one last time. The terrain looked quiet, too quiet in a way that experience had taught her never to trust. A sandstone formation jutted just above the designated landing zone. It was tall, uneven, and layered with enough natural overhang to hide bodies and muzzle flashes. It offered a sniper's view, but from the wrong side. She checked the range. It was well past 800 meters, beyond her original 0. Heat drift distorted the lines across her scope. Mirage shimmered faintly near the base of the rock face. It wasn't strong, but it pulled outlines just enough to threaten accuracy. She dialed wind hold, adjusted her elevation knob, and accounted for the lowering angle of the sun. Then she waited. A short transmission clicked in her ear. Talons approaching exfil. 1 minute. No request for overwatch support. No fire call. Just a timing mark. She shifted her reticle along the rocks again. At first, there was nothing. Then, at the edge of the sandstone, behind the deepest shade, she caught it. A sliver of movement, barely more than a distortion. She held steady. Thermal pinged, but weak 3 faint heat signatures crouched behind the formation. Still, patient, waiting. She sent 1 transmission, 3 behind teeth, no visible weapons, but they're staged. Ambush profile. Silence followed. She didn't expect a reply. Their exfil path was fixed. It was up to her to clear it. She pulled out her dope card and scanned her previous corrections. Her last accurate data at this range had been logged during a training rotation, under perfect light with controlled wind. This was real. Fading sun, swirling air, bad elevation. She calculated again. Her gut said 900.0 meters with partial obstruction. The slope between her and the target carried too many variables, but she'd run out of time. She steadied her breath, shoulders down, spine flat. First shot. The suppressed crack vanished into the air. The round skipped off sandstone and kicked up debris. The figures jerked. One stood to move. Second shot? She fired before the echo cleared. This one hit center mass. The fighter collapsed backward, weapon slipping from his grip. One down. The third figure sprinted left. The second dropped and clutched his side. Sloan adjusted again and fired. Dust exploded near the running man. He stumbled and dove into cover, dragging his partner out of view. Seconds later, the SEAL team appeared low, fast, moving across the valley without hesitation. No return fire met them. One operator pivoted mid-stride and threw a grenade toward the ambush position. The throw arced high and dropped clean behind the sandstone lip. The blast rolled out in a sharp, horizontal wave, then dissolved into haze. The Osprey emerged through that haze, a wall of noise and rotors sweeping dust across the flats. Its silhouette was wide and blinding, a black shape cutting through the sunlit cloud. The SEALs entered the storm and vanished inside it. She never saw them lift off, only saw the dust surge outward as they rose. Sloan stayed on scope, but there was no movement. The ambush site was empty. No heat signatures returned. Nothing rose from the blast zone. She watched a full minute longer. Then she let her cheek come off the stock. Her breathing was tight in her ribs. She released it slowly. She hadn't noticed how tense her hands had become until the fingers ached. She sat back, slowly, carefully, and wiped her lens with the inside of her sleeve. Her bolt was gritty again. She worked it twice to keep it clean. The shot had not been clean, not the first, but it had been fast. It had been what was needed. She pulled the dope card back out, marked it again. Range 900.0 meters. Visibility partial. Results 2 confirmed. 1 wounded. Ambush disrupted. Exfil successful. There was no voice in her ear. No thanks. No name passed back to her. That was by design. She looked back toward the ridge. The sandstone was still glowing gold on one side and black on the other. The place that had hidden men with rifles now looked like nothing at all. Just a stretch of rock and shadow in the middle of nowhere. She began breaking down her rifle. Barrel first, then bolt. She moved slowly, each part wrapped in cloth and returned to its place. The desert had returned to silence. She brushed her hand across the dirt, wiping away the shallow imprint where she had lain. There were no footprints. Nothing for a tracker to find, unless they were looking for ghosts. The Osprey was long gone. The wind had settled again. Sloan stood, slow and steady. There was still one more ridge between her and her exfil route. She shouldered her gear without a word. No one had seen her. That meant she had done it right. The extraction rotors had long faded into silence, swallowed by the canyons to the east. The wind returned in slow pulses, warm and dry, sliding dust over old rocks like a whisper smoothing the end of a story. Sloan remained still for another 10 minutes. She watched the trail vanish under the settling haze, confirming what she already knew. No one was coming for her. That was how it had always been planned. She moved with deliberate care, every motion silent and methodical. First the bolt, then the scope, each piece swaddled in cloth and packed into her canvas case. She brushed her hand along the sand where her elbows had rested. Shell casings. Just 2. Still warm earlier, now cool to the touch. She buried them in a shallow slit trench, marked the soil. then scattered wind-blown grit across it until the sight looked like nothing at all. A soft pull of her glove cleaned her fingerprints from the stock. One casing remained tucked in her chest pouch, next to the laminated dope card. That one would come with her. The ridge she had used for her final overwatch now looked unremarkable. The sweep of stone, the slight depression in the dirt, the hint of blackened dust from a single grenade blast, none of it would matter within hours. The wind would erase the rest. She turned once more to scan the valley. Empty. Silent. The only traces of movement were heat distortions trailing off the rocks like invisible ghosts. She slung the rifle case across her back and rose into a low crouch, adjusting the strap of her harness and settling the load across her shoulders. The sun had dipped below the rim, but the heat remained, trapped between the rock and the closing air. Her collar was stiff with dried sweat. Her lip had cracked, and when she touched it, her fingers came back dry and salted. Her boots made no sound on the descent path. She walked with practiced control, passing through shaded gaps and dry washes, retracing her entry route in reverse. She passed the outcrop, where the thermal-equipped scout had come within meters of her position. The place held no trace now. No prints. No tools. No sign she had ever been there. The terrain sloped downward into a natural cut where she'd buried a supply cache 3 days earlier. She stopped there. Kneeling beside the small marker, a triangular stone pushed half into the earth. She dug with her hands and unearthed the tarp, canteen, comms flare, and a sealed pouch of salt tabs. The flare remained untouched. It had always been meant for emergencies. She left it in the dirt. She unscrewed the canteen and drank slowly. Each sip was measured. One mouthful. Wait. Another. She didn't sit down. Didn't remove the harness. The body stayed in gear until the route was clear. She checked her watch. No second hand. No ticking sound. Just the weight of time passing in silence. She watched the minutes click forward. The rhythm of the job. The only way to know when to disappear. The radio pinged once against her chest. A flat, encrypted signal. No voice, no call sign, just the pulse that told her the SEAL team was aboard and logged. She pressed the transmit button with her thumb. Odin complete. No visuals. All accounted. Her voice held no inflection. The radio made no reply. It didn't need to. She returned the canteen to her belt, folded the tarp without unfolding it, and buried the empty pouch beneath loose shale. One glance over her shoulder confirmed the haze was thickening again. Heat shimmers still twisted the ridgelines, even in dusk. Her body ached in small, unimportant ways, knees stiff, shoulders pulled, sweat crust itching along her jawline. She ignored it. The desert was falling into silence. She started walking, moving east toward the final rally point. No lights, no tracks, no guide. Just her own memorized course etched into the shape of the land. She had rehearsed the route so many times it moved under her like muscle memory. Her pace remained steady. 1 kilometer, then another. Each step pressed faintly into the powdery sand, then faded as the wind stirred it. She didn't look back. That wasn't part of the job. What mattered was behind her, unfinished, unread, and unseen. Her boots left almost nothing. Her presence less. She would reach the exit coordinates just past nightfall. The air would be cooler then, and the sky flat and black. Someone would be waiting. Not to welcome her. Just to confirm exfil and mark her as accounted. She would hand off the dope card. Transfer nothing else. No debrief. No medal. No story. Just a call sign stripped from the record and a mark moved from red to green on a classified dashboard. Her name would not appear in the mission report. The SEALs would be credited with a clean extraction under minimal resistance. Intelligence would note the disrupted ambush as likely enemy error. The op would be filed under successful with no further notes. The shell casing in her pouch would never be logged. Just a habit. Something to hold when the silence got too long. She stepped around a dry branch. Her shadow stretched thin behind her in the purple dusk. Her breath remained even. She didn't check the map. She didn't need to. The route was inside her, And the desert, as always, kept no record of her passing.